Good morning. My name is Heather Leeson. I'm with Open Knowledge Foundation, and today I have a guest, Sam Muirhead, and he's going to teach us all about video and help us get prepared to plan for OKFest, but also for anything else that you're taking videos on. I know that video is a big part of storytelling, and certainly you can watch many things on YouTube, and with a global community, it certainly makes it helpful to be able to kind of shift time together and be able to share stories. So Sam, thank you so much for joining us and for volunteering your time to share your awesome skills. So I understand that you have a program. You're going to kind of put us through like video boot camp. So maybe perhaps you can give us a little bit about information about who is Cameralibre and who are you. Maybe do a slight introduction for us. And welcome to my fellow colleagues.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Sam. I'm originally from New Zealand, now based in Berlin, and I'm working with video, doing lots of different projects, but really focused on the free Libra and open kind of area. And so doing a lot of work with Open Knowledge Foundation, with other open organizations, and my own projects as well. So I only use free Libra open source software for making those videos. So it's all based on Linux and using a number of different programs, which I'll tell you about over the course of this discussion as well.
There, it says that I was typing. You still have that kind of demon face going on. I know that that's very privacy aware of you. It must be one of those great features. It's awesome. At any rate, I just wanted to warn you that you have demon face.
I'll just turn my camera back on and off and see if that's, no, it's still staying with demon face.
It's all good. It's all good. It's lessons in video all around. So that's great. So you only use open source tools to be able to create video, and you've provided a list for everybody. So those are on the G+ account, all the kind of tools and resources. So thanks so much for sharing that. Maybe go ahead through what you're going to, let's go through sharing your screen perhaps, and then I know we're going to have some questions from some of our folks. We won't worry about the demon screen. It'll just be that moment.
So what we're going to kind of look at today is what you need to think about when shooting a video. This is both what professional people kind of think about before they go into their work, but also just if you want to capture a moment on a smartphone, just the important things you need to think about before even getting to the location, what you need to think about while doing the recording, and then how to deal with that footage afterwards. So what you need to be doing in terms of post-production. So I can give you a few tips on that. Maybe it's worthwhile kind of asking if people have experience with shooting video and what kind of problems they have along the way. I mean, I'm very familiar with the common problems because I've come up with them myself, but if anyone has anything specific, it would be interesting to hear that before we get going as well.
A number of years ago, I used Final Cut Pro, and I was editing videos for work, and I'm completely out of the loop. But I do know that stabilizing video and making sure that it's properly framed are two of the things that I always find really important, and also just the external noise. I find that so hard. I don't know, Milena, Lucy, anybody else have kind of items that you think are hard to manage?
I have a similar question as well, because I think that from my experience, from my very brief experience making films, I think that I have a similar problem with the quality of the sound, because I think from my experience, at least, irrespective of how kind of grainy the film that you take is, you can kind of generally work out what's going on. But I've actually found that of the two, if you have really bad image quality and actually quite high sound quality, actually ends up with a better result than the other way around.
Absolutely.
I find it really kind of frustrating. So I am also really interested in combining things with sound, because I guess that quite a lot of what people will be doing will probably be making kind of little sound bites or something.
Yes.
So.
I also have a question. This is Milena. So my frustration with working with video has been that I'm shooting with my camera that records in a format, and I'm trying to edit it with a software that doesn't support that format. So are there any tools or do you recommend any tools to switch from format to format, or is there any format that we should look at?
That question is one that's very easily solvable right now. A program called Handbrake. The website is handbrake.fr. I'll just type that in. There's one of them, and another one is called MPEG Stream Clip. And both of those two will deal with, basically you can throw any type of file format at them and they can convert them into something specific for your program. And so maybe let's get into certainly what Lucy was saying about audio is one of the common kind of big surprises when people start making videos for the first time. You know, you buy the camera with the highest resolution possible and you think that your videos are going to turn out wonderful, but then if you're using the internal microphone, recording very far away from the subject, then you're always going to have poor quality audio, and that is so much more difficult to deal with as a viewer than poor quality video is. People can sit through a whole kind of 10-minute video of poor video, but basically they can only handle a few seconds of bad audio.
It's also that Sennheiser mics are really large. It's really hard to put those in your pocket, like those really good kind of effective microphones.
Absolutely, yeah. There are a couple of good little tricks. So let's start with audio. Basically, I don't want to get too hung up on gear because gear is not nearly as important as good technique. But there are a couple of things. I wish my camera was working properly. It was working fine before. But basically, a small lavalier microphone and which is a little lapel mic which clips to your lapel is one of the best investments you can have. And basically, there's a little $30 microphone called the Audio-Technica ATR3550, which is basically incredibly cheap, and the quality is kind of decent for a lapel mic, but what's important is that it gets close to the viewer, to the person speaking. And this is really the key thing with recording audio in any situation, is just getting close. Because even if you've got a super fancy, you know, $1,000 microphone, if you're a few meters away from the person talking, then you're likely to pick up background noise. But let's start talking about if you're preparing a video. Basically, the things you need to think about, before even getting started, because a lot of the time you kind of go to an event, you don't know what you're going to shoot, and you just try and capture everything, and you end up basically wiping the background with your camera, and then coming back and you've got 10 hours of relatively useless footage. And so a better way to go about that is before you even go to the event, just kind of think, what kind of videos would you like to see afterwards? What do you hope to achieve with the video? What kind of information are you trying to convey with it? And basically kind of write out a little list of the big questions you want to answer. So that is what, where, when, who, why, and how of the situation. So if you're going to the Open Fest, for example, you'll want to be thinking about, you want to be telling everyone what's going on, what the location is, and some of the interesting things happening there. And once you've got that kind of written down on a little piece of paper, it's a lot easier when you actually turn up. You kind of know what it is that you need to be getting, you know what it is that is of interest to you, and it should theoretically stop you from kind of spending your entire time just holding down the record button. One other thing to think about is also the length of the video. If you are recording a 10-hour epic, then sure, keep recording things. But if the final result is only going to be a 1 or 2 minute video, then really you don't need to spend the entire afternoon recording absolutely everything. You really need to kind of focus on the shots that you want to get. In the videos that you guys have been recording in the past, have they been kind of live events that you've been trying to get? Have they been interviews? What kind of experience have you had?
I was trying to record. I did a little road trip and was trying to do, instead of having to write a long report, a kind of series of video interviews. And so it worked relatively well. But I was very glad that I standalone. Like, the video quality was absolutely dreadful. And I think, yeah, should have learned an awful lot about lighting and bits and pieces like that along the way. But yeah, broadly interviews, I think, and I think probably most of the ones will be interviews going forward as well.
Well, I can also give a few tips for the general kind of shooting of interviews as well. I've actually got a few notes that I can put on the page after we're done with this as well, which can kind of work like a bit of a checklist once we're finished for you to have a read of before you go out and shoot other things. But basically, you want to, first of all, before you start shooting, just really work out what the ideal location to be shooting in is. Even if somebody has been kind of giving a presentation in a particular location, or you basically need to find a place that is, the ideal location is one that makes the person talking feel comfortable, preferably has some kind of relevance to the story that they're talking about. And it also should be technically or aesthetically suitable for filming. So this basically means no kind of really loud background noises. So very common background noises, and the most difficult ones to get rid of in post are people talking, basically. If there's a huge crowd and they're talking away, it's extremely difficult to remove that noise from your audio, simply because that's exactly the same, has exactly the same frequency as the sounds that you really want. Air conditioners, absolutely, and fridges are another one as well. So you might even kind of be very used to those kind of hums going on, and you'll just be sitting down to shoot, and then just have a little stop just before you press record and think, hang on a minute, are there any strange noises here? And if there's a fridge going or something in the background, just go over and turn it off, and it will help wonderfully. Also, if in the middle of your recording you suddenly have all of these ambulances, charging by with their sirens going, or if you suddenly get, an atom bomb going off, then maybe just pause for a moment, wait until the nuclear haze has dissipated, and then you can kind of start recording again. Also, in terms of lighting, you need to be a little aware of there are, I'm not going to get into the science of it about light temperature, but there are basically there are two different main temperatures for light. You get a very kind of blue light from daylight and a very yellow light from tungsten traditional light bulbs, and so it's best to pick one of those two lights to be using. So if you're right by a window and there's plenty of light coming in, maybe don't turn on a light right next to it as well. Just try and keep the white balance of the picture all kind of one format. Another thing to do with setting the video levels. Do you guys want me to get into some basics of the settings for cameras and audio?
I think that'd be great. Yes, and also just whether you do. Just one other question, Sam, I guess, is just about do you test when you just started recording about background noise? That's what I was just going to follow up with your previous point on, and how do you test it if it's in a noisy environment?
Yes, so headphones are one of the best pieces of gear to have with you, basically. So basically, just in the few moments before recording, just even if you're going to do an interview, for example, it's a good idea to set everything up for yourself until you're feeling comfortable, and make sure that your camera is working, you've got battery, your audio is okay, the background noise isn't too bad, and then once you've kind of got that little internal checklist ticked off for yourself, then you can bring in the person that you're interviewing, and that really just helps to make sure that you're feeling comfortable as well, and you can actually concentrate on talking to them in a natural way rather than kind of running around trying to adjust the levels and things like that while you're actually recording. So in terms of settings, with cameras there are usually some things that you can change and some things that you can't change. One that's a little confusing, not just for beginners but also for people working in video, is the frame rate, because this is a horrible hangover from the days of television. If you're in North America, Central America, or South America, basically your camera will shoot at 29.97 frames per second, and then if you're in Europe, it's 25. But luckily, we don't need to worry about that too much anymore, because most of the time you'll be editing your own footage and uploading it to the web. So that's not too much of an issue unless you're combining footage with other people. Also, the format that you can shoot with most video cameras, as Milena was saying, basically it just spits out what it spits out in the case of kind of most consumer video cameras and smartphones and things like that. And a tool like Handbrake or MPEG Streamclip will help you out if you're having trouble bringing that into your editing program. One you can usually adjust is the resolution of your camera. So there'll be various different options. I'll just copy and paste this here. So these are kind of the standard ones that you'll have, the full HD all the way through to SD. But basically, if you can avoid it, never ever shoot in SD. There's just, I mean, those standards were invented in 1953 for the MTSC standards, and we've moved on a little bit since then. So always shoot in the absolute highest resolution that your camera will allow. If you do want to upload it later on at a lower resolution, that's fine, but it's always best to get as much information as possible into your editing program so that you can then have more flexibility in the edit later on. And basically, some cameras have a lot more automatic control, some have a lot more manual control. If you feel confident turning off some of those automatic settings, if you've got if you've tried out a few different things and you feel like you've got the hang of the exposure now, or you're in a place where the lighting isn't going to change a great deal, it's probably worthwhile turning off those automatic settings for focus, for audio levels, for white balance, but only if you feel confident. The main thing is just getting good quality footage and not worrying too much about it. For audio recording settings, here you usually have a little bit more opportunity to change things. A lot of the time they'll offer you a variety of different audio recording options, and really what you want to be recording in is an uncompressed codec. So an MP3 or an OGG Vorbis, for example, that is compressed to save file size. That also means that the more you work with those files, the more the quality drops. So that's going to be a problem. You want to have one where basically all of the information is retained, and I can copy and paste something I've got here. So basically you want to look for FLAC, Free Libra Audio Codec, AIFF, or WAV, or M4A. All of those are lossless codecs, and they'll be perfectly useful for all your audio recording. If the only option on your device is MP3 or OGG Vorbis, that's totally fine. But if you have the option to use one of the better ones, please do, because that'll help a lot. As I said, these are just settings. None of these are as important as getting the microphone close to the person talking and recording in a quiet environment, or in an environment where you and the person speaking feels comfortable and the lighting is relatively even. So when you're about to, we've gone over kind of when you're about to record, let's get into what you should be thinking about when you're actually recording. The first thing, and I did, I think, link on the Google Plus page to a very nice page by a university which was looking at some of the key aspects to think about when making video, which is a really great series of tips. And the first one is a very important one. If you're shooting on a smartphone, please hold it horizontal rather than vertical. There's very little that can be done to try and integrate vertically recorded smartphone footage in with other footage. So that's the number one thing to watch out for. And kind of remember that basically you're telling a story to people who weren't in the room at the time. A lot of the time when you're filming, you kind of think, yeah, well, it's obvious that we're in this particular location. All I need to do is focus on what the person's saying in the interview. But really, I mean, you will have learned this in high school English. Establishing shots are incredibly important as well. I mean, the traditional establishing shot is something like, if you're shooting in Paris, you start with a shot of the Eiffel Tower, and then you cut to whoever's talking. It doesn't need to be quite that kind of cliched or obvious. An establishing shot can be many different things. If you're shooting an art gallery, for example, you might get a shot of the window announcing it. You might get a shot of some people milling around looking at the art, and then you'll cut to the artist in the interview or something like that. I'll just actually show you a little shot from one of my videos, if I can just share my screen.
Sam, I just wanted to say thanks so much for all these resources and tips. I've been taking massive amounts of notes myself, so I really appreciate it. As you get to your screen sharing, go ahead. It's all yours.
Is the screen sharing working?
It is. I'm like having a reflecting moment. Go ahead.
I don't think it's working for me, but...
Can
everybody else see Sam's screen? No? And he's gone robot-y. Okay, from demon faces to robots, we're getting a 101 on cameras today and how to take better video. Does anybody else have other questions to queue up for Sam until his sound comes back?
Okay, so my screenshot's not really working, but anyway, I can just put in a link to this video. Is that working? Hello? Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Absolutely, very clear.
Okay. I'm trying to work out why I can't post. I think I posted the same link 3 times, but it's not working. Anyway, I'll send you a link once we finish talking as well. It basically shows a whole pile of different establishing shots. And so I was doing a video for Open Data Day this year, and we realized that it was just going to be a very short, brief, there it is, very short, brief video without too much kind of interview footage or anything like that. And so I realized I needed to tell a lot of stories quite visually. And so basically decided to put in a whole bunch of different shots that would, in the first kind of 25 seconds or so, explain a lot of the how, what, where, why, and who, just by putting in a shot of the U-Bahn in Berlin, so people would get an idea that it's Berlin, a shot of the building we were shooting in, the Wikimedia Deutschland logo to show that was their space, and then just some of the activities going on around the location before we actually kind of cut to the action and what people were doing on the day. And that's the kind of thing that you can incorporate quite quickly and easily when you're on a location shooting. Just kind of while you're shooting, think what would somebody who wasn't here need to know in order to be put in this place. They need to know kind of either an exact or a general idea of the location, so maybe get a shot of the building, maybe get a shot of the room. If there are particular characteristics of the location, like if you're in London, you know, get a shot of London double-decker buses or the black cabs or something like that. Those kind of things are very useful for just hinting at the information that people need to know without needing to put up lots and lots of titles saying, you know, London, England, and things like that. So, while you're shooting as well, there are a couple of different things to think about which will help your footage be of a higher quality as well. You see a lot of kind of pans in some footage which are just kind of, they're just not really panning from one thing to another. Rather, it's more just wiping the environment with the camera. And really, you need to kind of think about a good first position for doing a pan, and then think about a second position that you can move to. And it's a good idea to rehearse this before you actually press record as well. Because if you're recording during this, you'll just be filling up your hard drive with lots more footage that you'll need to waste time watching later on. Instead, it's worth just having a couple of little rehearsals and then pressing record once you know you've got the movement right and it's working. Another good thing to think about when doing things like pans is to make it as useful as possible in the edit. Perhaps find your first position, hold the video for 10 seconds on that position, then do your smooth pan to your number 2 position, and then hold there for another 10 seconds as well. This means that when you get that piece of footage into your editing program, basically you can either take just the first shot, just the third shot, or you can take the pan and some of either of the other 2 as well. So basically trying to maximize the possibilities from the footage that you're actually getting. And a good thing to think about with everything you're shooting is basically to make sure you get a couple of different sizes of shots as well. Usually when cutting between shots, people will start to get a little bit, or they'll notice the cuts a lot more if you're always cutting from the same size shot to the same size shot. So if you've got a lot of talking heads, people talking, they're all framed the same way, people will kind of get a little annoyed by that. It's better if you can get some wide shots, get some close-ups, and just try and get a few different sizes when you're doing it too. I see a lot of people using zooms when they're just starting out in shooting video as well, so kind of the digital zoom it's not necessarily a recommended look. It's very good for 1970s exploitation action films with long zooms, or for picking out something in a distant shot, but it's not really something I would recommend using. It tends to look like a tourist video. So I'd say be very wary of zooms. They probably work quite well in humorous videos and vines and things like that, but it's not really a particularly great look. Another thing to think about when shooting is just before you leave the yes, the change in focus, Milena says. So that is fantastic if you have something like if you've got a DSLR camera, so one of these photography cameras that can shoot video, then you're likely to have quite a large sensor, and that means that you can get quite a nice shallow depth of field. And when you're doing a change in focus, what's called a focus pull, basically you'll want to make sure that the camera is staying relatively stable when you're doing it. So if you could put it on a tripod or something like that, you need to make sure that the aperture is as wide as, well, quite wide. So with these DSLRs, you can adjust them, open up the aperture really wide. That means you've got the shallowest depth of field possible, and then find preferably 2 relevant things to pull focus between. A lot of the time, especially when people are just starting out, they kind of just grab 2 things and pull focus between them, and so you've got someone talking about an interesting, exciting story, and then you've, for some reason, got a focus pull between a stapler and a pencil sharpener. So you kind of want to make sure that that's as relevant as possible when you're doing it.
Sam,
yes?
There is a question. Someone was asking, I often film people at events that have little or no media experience, mostly scientists, and I wonder whether anyone has had any thoughts on how to help them ease in the unusual situation of being in front of a camera, and how to help them look good. Concise statements that would work in film, for example. Would you work on a script? How do you prepare? Because you can have as great a shot as you want, but if somebody's terrified of cameras, how do you help them with that journey? I think that's a really important question.
Yeah, so there's a few different things. First of all, just spending a little bit of time with them before you press record. Just make sure that you kind of let them know what you're going to be talking about, how the footage is going to be used, what the audience is, if you're interviewing a scientist, whether the people that should be watching the video are fellow scientists or if they're students and things like that. Another thing to think about is how they phrase their answers as well. It all kind of depends on the question that you ask. If you're going to ask a question like, did you find this aspect of your research difficult? Then they might simply answer yes, or yes because blah 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 blah. And that's not necessarily going to be the most useful soundbite that you can have when editing. Basically, you want to make sure that they can kind of repeat the question in the answer. So you can either ask them, a lot of the time journalists will ask people to specifically repeat the question in the answer. So they might say, I had some difficulties in my research and this and this and this. Or another way is to just kind of use the way that you ask the question in a way that there's no way they can say yes or no to that. So I might say, I understand there were some difficult moments at certain times in your research process. Would you be able to tell me a little bit about that? So that's something where they can't kind of just jump into the sentence without introducing it. They really need to set the scene in their own sentence, and so that's going to be a much better soundbite that you can take out of it.
One of the things that I've found is to do the pre-interview, and I think that a lot of organizations, when they are interviewing you, they've interviewed you a couple of times ahead of time just to kind of help you frame it, but also helps you kind of make sure that you're not saying and I mean all of us say it's part of our feeling about connecting, but also our discomfort with some of the things that we might want to say. So I think it's really important to just like almost have a pre-interview, especially if somebody's really nervous. I like to spend a little bit of time with them ahead of time. But I think that in the sense of a festival, it's pretty hard because there's like all these chaos and tangents everywhere. So I think it's hard not to put people on the spot, as Lucy said. Not to put them on the spot. But at the same time, you have to kind of figure out how you do things in a frame of a crazy festival. What I've done at special events is ask them well in advance, say, hey, listen, I'm doing this video thingy. Can I talk to you at the event? And then I talk to them a couple hours ahead of time and say, so can we do it at this time? And here's what we're going to talk about. And I kind of because there's a lot of things going on and it's exciting to be at an event, I kind of prep it up quite a bit. Generally, I end up chasing them a lot, and I know that anybody else who's doing videos and events, you find that you really are chasing. The best events I've been at where people have been planning interviews or videos is to have scheduled times where you need to come between this time and this time. If you want to tell your story, this is where we're doing it, and it's a stationary, quiet place that's already been set up. Because events are just so random and so awesome, and I like to call them cauliflowers, they're like all over the place, it can make it really hard to not have a set designated interview place. Now, OSCON, one of the largest open source conferences, they actually have a place where you're supposed to go to take pictures and videos because they just know it's going to be mayhem. So I think that's maybe something that maybe we can learn from. But anyway, just to go on a slight tangent in terms of like, while we're doing video, you've done quite a bit of videos at events. What are some of the other tips that you have for how to, like, you've talked about the technology piece of it, which is important. You've talked about how do you shape people, and you've talked about the different styles of video. Is there any other tips that you can give about how to do things in this fast, crazy pace?
Well, one other thing, especially when you were talking about people umming and ahhing, and I'm certainly somebody who does that a lot as well, but basically if you can get what's called B-roll or cutaway shots, so these are when the person is talking, if you need to slice out a section of their speech, or if there's a whole section where they're kind of searching for the words and don't quite know what to say, then you can basically chop out that section of the audio, kind of butt those two pieces of video up against one another, and then lay over another shot of some other things that are going on over that footage. What is quite important is trying to keep those cutaways relevant to what they're talking about, and so a lot of the time at events there will be many things around the place which are relevant to what they're talking about. So if you're at a maker fair and they're talking about 3D printing or something, then you'd better make sure that you've got some shots of 3D printers going, or just general kind of people having fun at the event, interesting aesthetic shots from around the place. They're all very useful for helping the speakers' ideas and thoughts come out clearly and understandably to the audience, and also just to cut down on time so that you don't have a ridiculously long ridiculously long piece of video that could have been shortened quite a lot. What else? So another thing we can talk about is the actual editing as well.
Sam, before we move on to editing, could I just ask, just while you were talking about kind of engineering events, I had a question on that topic. Is it all right to ask it?
Mm-hmm.
Just because, so when we sent this round the team, one of the things that some people who unfortunately couldn't be here today asked us to ask you was just about, I know Heather kind of briefly touched on it, but I just wonder whether you've got any other innovative solutions to it when people don't want to be filmed, which is quite often the case at some of the events that we go to. Ways for them to either mark, or do you get everybody to kind of sign release forms? Like, what's your kind of process for making sure that people are actually happy to be filmed when you're filming in kind of crowded spaces?
My general approach is to make sure that in the information going out before the event, so the emails about it, the information on the website, that there's something on there just saying there will be people filming at this event. So that people aren't shocked when suddenly they turn up and there's cameras there, and so that people are at least expecting it. And when they're actually there, make it very clear that, so say it in the introduction, for example, when someone's introducing the event, that we're filming this event. If anyone would prefer not to be in the video, Sam over there is looking after video, just go and say hi to him, and he'll make sure that you won't appear in the video. And in that case, basically I would try and avoid filming them specifically during the filming, and then if I happen to spot them in the editing, I would make sure that they wouldn't go in there. That's only happened a few times to me. Most of the time, especially when you're kind of an organization like Open Knowledge Foundation, generally the people participating in those events are happy to appear in those videos, but it's always a good idea to make sure that everyone knows this is what's happening, this is how the video is going to be used as well, and that if you don't want to be in it, you can absolutely opt out, and we're perfectly happy to do that. But certainly telling them beforehand is a good idea.
I've also found that having the sign right when you come to the entrance saying there will be photos and there will be videos, and most concerts have that kind of thing, and if you want to not be involved in the photo and video, you need to self-select. I think there's something to be said about, like, as we prepare for OKFest, where we ask everyone who is taking videos to stand up so that people know what they look like. It's hard with a room full of 1,000 people, but I mean, at the same time, maybe we make sure that the camera people are self-identified in a certain way, rather than all the people who don't want to be photoed. At RightsCon, what they did is they had a section in rooms. So if people were videoing the rooms, there was a section cordoned off where they couldn't be captured by video, and people knew not to. And I was participating remotely, and I heard this from friends, but I thought that was a really cool idea, is that rooms were sectioned off to say no cameras here, right? And so it's pretty hard at an event to do that, but I think that there's some methodologies around it for sure that we have to consider. Thanks so much. So we have about, just so you know, we have about 15 minutes left, and we certainly want to talk about what happens, if this is all right, Sam, what happens after we take the videos. And again, I'm really excited about all the tools that you've shared about open source tools that we can use for editing and for preparing, but if we can move on to that topic, unless somebody else has questions about event setup and stuff.
Yeah. Well, basically most video editing programs will all work in a very, very similar way. So I'll see if my screen share is working here. Can you see the screen here? Oh, there's Lucy. Can you see my screen? No? Right, so my screen share doesn't seem to be working too well either. But basically, you've got you've always got a section which has all of your files in it, and it's a good idea, even though I didn't have that in that particular example. It's a good idea to have that ordered into kind of folders, just so that you can find the footage that you need and the audio that you need, and you can bring in your titles and things in a nice ordered way. And then you've generally got a timeline down the bottom. But one thing that is quite useful. A lot of the time people tend to focus on effects and things with video editing. I'll get into some of them in a moment in terms of the ones that are actually useful. But you'll also find that the best way to improve your camera work is basically by editing your own footage. It's somewhat of it involves a little bit of self-loathing sometimes, because you're sitting there kind of shaking your fist at your own camera work. But when you are looking to solve problems in the edit and the footage simply isn't there, that makes you make a little mental note and makes you get it next time as well. So I use a program called KDN Live to edit, which is the best of the Linux ones, simply because that has all of the basic functions you need for video editing, and most of the professional things as well. It's not quite up there with Avid and Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere, but it's close enough. For free versions, I also don't have a perfect solution yet, so hopefully OpenShot will be providing a good solution later on. One thing I would say with the more kind of some of the problems that people come up with when editing videos for the first time is the audio kind of jumping from one level to another, or on the cuts you suddenly hear this very noticeable audio change. And there are a couple of different ways that you can hide that audio issue. One is simply using crossfades on audio. I mean, people use crossfades on video all the time. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it in all cases, but using nice kind of short crossfades on the audio will help to smooth out those cuts. Also, you can adjust the spot where the audio cuts and have that asynchronous with the time when the video cuts. So this will also help to make it less jarring when there's a change in the video. If suddenly the audio changes as well as the video, then you're going to notice that video change a whole lot more. And so there's what's called in the, I'll see if I can find a good example for you and send you a link, but basically there's what's called L cuts or J cuts, and that name is based on the actual shape that it makes in the video editing window, where you pull the audio, either the audio starts playing from the next shot while you're still watching the previous shot, or the audio from the previous shot continues into the next shot, and that can help to kind of link different scenes together, and that can also smooth the general watching experience. I would recommend a couple of simple effects and things that are very easy to work with and can certainly help a lot. One is just using a fade to black or a fade from black. This shouldn't be used all over the place, but can be used very usefully to show the passage of time, so the end or a start of a chapter, or the end of a day or story or something like that. A dissolve or crossfading between different videos tends to have a little bit of a kind of it doesn't always work. It can come across as somewhat of an 80s kind of romantic music video look, but it can be used a lot to show the change of state. So kind of like in the way that you would use a time lapse if someone was building something or something was growing, you can use that video crossfade to kind of show the change in state between the two different things. In terms of color correction, there's I just saw Milena saying, what about for Windows? What do you think of Lightworks? For Windows, the only one that I've got experience with on Windows is Premiere, Adobe Premiere, which seems to be kind of one of the front runners at the moment. Seems to have taken a lot of users from Final Cut, and that does seem to work very effectively. And it also kind of fits in with the rest of the Adobe products as well. Lightworks is somewhat confusing for anybody who's used basically any other video editing program. It doesn't work in the same way as many of the others, and it is quite powerful, but it's not the most user-friendly of editing programs. And certainly the Linux version is quite buggy at the moment, so I don't see myself switching to it. It's also not open source. And couple of other effects to mention very briefly would be, in terms of color correction, most programs have something called an auto white balance effect. You might find it's quite unusual when you've got some shots that are very yellow, some shots that are very blue, and some have some kind of green tint. A way to fix that is to use one of these auto white balance effects, where basically you have like an eyedropper tool, and you use that to pick out a particular object in the video. So you're effectively saying this blue cat right here is in fact meant to be a white cat, and the program will take that readout and it will adjust the colors to fit. You've also got curves, which is something that you find in all sorts of different video editing programs, as well as if you're familiar with Photoshop or GIMP or any of those projects, you'll find curves are a very common way of adjusting all the different colors, and that's probably the most user-friendly way to fiddle with it. I'll see if I can hunt out a couple of tutorials and send you them. My screen share doesn't seem to be working too well at the moment, so I don't know if I can explain that. The last one to mention, especially because it's got a funny name, which you might not recognize when you see it, is the Ken Burns effect. But it's something that I'm sure you've all seen many, many times, and it's named after the documentary maker Ken Burns, who basically started this. He was doing the Civil War documentary, where you've got a lot of photographs, but of course no film footage from the Civil War. And so you have a photograph, and you can basically do a slow pan and zoom across from one spot to another. Many video editing programs have a specially called Ken Burns effect, and you can just set a start point and an end point. Otherwise, you can do it manually by just setting it to start at 100% and move into 150%. I suppose I should give you some tips for exporting as well. That would probably be quite useful, I guess. Anything else anyone wants to know about the video editing programs before we move on there? No? Okay. Exporting. Okay. So there are a few different file types for this. I mean, the most common one that both YouTube and Vimeo will be wanting is H.264, and this is just it's actually the same file format that many cameras record to as well, but it's used because it's quite a high quality footage and relatively low file sizes. So that with Basic possible. For exporting to YouTube and Vimeo, they are going to re-encode it, so you want to give it as much information as possible. So where possible, 1080p, which is, sorry, I'll just type in the correct pixels, 1920 by 1080 pixels, and that will basically be the best thing that you can possibly give to them. For audio, again, you want to go with lossless. With audio, you can really afford to go for quite high quality audio. So I showed you that same thing that I posted before. AIFF, WAV, and FLAC are the settings you really want to be using. And usually what I do, especially with, for example, when I'm doing a video for an organization and I want them to have that video so they can reuse it and they can re-edit it, or they can give it to other people if they need to recut it in some way. I normally give them a lossless video as well, or a video that's high quality. So a lot of the time with Apple, you might use a ProRes codec, or with kind of Avid-based things, or Premiere, you might use something called DNX HD. And these basically keep a huge amount of the original information of the footage, and they can handle being re-encoded a number of times without losing quality loss. On Linux, I use something called Matroska most of the time. And this is basically just a high quality thing, so you don't need to worry about people re-editing your low quality internet footage. What else do we need to talk about?
Does anybody else have questions for Sam while he's here? I really appreciate, again, like just how much detail you're providing and sharing with us. We have about 5 minutes left. I just kind of want to flag that. Maybe, Sam, because you're giving such a gift to us and telling us all these different things, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what is Cameralibre and how does it work, and will you be at OKFest, and how can we learn more, and how can we support you back?
Yeah, well, I've just got kind of 2 projects at the moment. Cameralibre is just my my name and website for the videos that I make. So some of the projects I'm working on are just informational videos for organizations that I like. Some of it is just videos to pay the rent. But sometimes I'm also trying to find ways of using free Libra open source tools in order to make it easier for more people to make videos. Also find new ways of using open source in video as well. A lot of the time people just, I mean, I use Creative Commons free culture licenses as well, but I think there are many more creative ways you can use video. For example, I'm doing a video at the moment for Fragenstadt, which is the German Freedom of Information website, and the idea is to, it's an animation made with a program called Synfig. It's almost finished, and the idea with that is that we will open source not just the actual video, but also the project files as well, so that it's very easily editable by other Freedom of Information websites. So there's around 15 websites around the world that all kind of serve the same purpose. They explain freedom of information, they offer ways to digitally ask for information, but there are no videos on any of these websites explaining why it's important, how it works. And so we want to make it easy so that people can basically take the project files of my video, take out the Reichstag and all of the other kind of German-specific aspects of the video, and slot in, the White House or whatever country-specific images you need, and then redo the voiceover in your own language, your own accent, and then you've got very, very quickly and for a very low cost, you've got your own animation for a Freedom of Information website. And I think there's many different opportunities to use videos in that way, and to, especially with animations, it's very easy to find ways to share these files between one another. The other project that I work on is the Opennet Agency, and the website is openettagency.eu. And this is a new project with a couple of people here in Berlin, and we're basically trying to find ways to help companies, organizations, and communities either go completely open source or use open source ideas and processes in their work. So that's the other thing that's kind of keeping me busy.
Super. Okay, we got 3. Thanks so much for that overview. Really, really, truly appreciate it. Oh, and you were behind the School of Data video. How cool is that? Well, thank you again, Sam. Does anybody else have closing questions for Sam? Besides all of us cheering and saying thank you so much for sharing so much information and giving us tips and sharing your free tool list, and hoping that everyone takes great video at OKFest is really, really fantastic.
I have one Sorry, I have one super evil question, Sam, which is, what's the biggest mistake that you've ever made making a video, if anything comes to mind?
Yes, sometimes this was a long while ago, but sometimes when you're kind of looking through footage on the camera, you kind of you see like short clips where there were errors made. Maybe it's 1 second long or something, and you just want to tidy that up and just make sure that you've kind of got a nice, easy to understand piece of footage or files. And basically I was going through just deleting a whole pile of really useless pieces of footage, and managed to delete something completely unreplaceable, and had to kind of change the whole script of the video I was making to work around it. So now I've learned to not edit in camera too much, and just leave that kind of deletion until I've got 2 copies of absolutely everything. And now I kind of carry my laptop and my hard drive with 2 copies of all the footage in 2 separate bags wherever I go and things like that. So it's turned me into a very paranoid person with regards to file security. But I highly recommend that everyone else be paranoid about it as well, because it's easier to do than you think.
Wow. Wow. Now that I'm scared, I'm still going to take video, though. It's good to always have backups, too. Backup of the backup. I agree. So again, Sam, I just wanted to say thanks again for sharing all this different detail. You're always welcome to guest post and share on the OKFF blog. I'm getting our brand name wrong. I'm so sorry. Open Knowledge blog. You're more than happy to give back, and I'm sure that you've been great to us. So if there's anything that we can do to support your work, we certainly be glad for it. For those of you that have been watching this hour program, it's a community session with Open Knowledge. We're really keen to kind of share skills and to help us tell the open story around the world, and certainly video is a big part of that. And Sam just donated his time and his knowledge to help us kind of get better at this. And I just want to say thanks again so much. Super useful, and I have all kinds of homework. Great, and he's going to post more notes later. Okay, great. So I did add a bunch of notes into the Google Plus, just some kind of talking notes, but very much a lot of thanks coming from people from all the different social media places that people are talking at me today. So again, thanks for Open Knowledge, and thanks Sam Muirhead from Cameralibre. Everybody have a great day, and we'll be in touch. Okay, I'm going to stop broadcast, and I'm going to stop immediately.